Crazy MIL tried to ruin my baby shower food because my due date clashes with her wedding. So let me just get straight to it. My mother-in-law and I do not get along. We never have. From the very start, she's been nothing but rude to me. And at this point, I have given up trying to understand why. Now, you might be thinking, oh, maybe she's just an overprotective mom who has a hard time letting go of her son. Nope, that's not it. She dislikes me simply because I'm a good wife to her son. Let me give you some background. My husband Jake had a rough childhood because of her. See, my mother-in-law Linda never believed in marriage. She was always jumping from one relationship to another, and even though she got married twice, both times ended in disaster. Jake is her eldest, from her first marriage, and what he went through as a kid is honestly heartbreaking. His parents were toxic together, so toxic that sometimes their fights got physical. Jake had to witness all of it firsthand. On top of that, Linda was a heavy drinker, so there were days when she'd go off on a bender and just forget to feed her kid. His biological father wasn't any better, so when he finally walked out on them, Jake was left to fend for himself. Then, things got even worse. After his dad left, Linda got into drugs. So now, on top of looking after himself, Jake had to look after her too, making sure she didn't overdose or end up in a ditch somewhere. By the time he got into college, he had had enough. He moved straight into a dorm and tried to start fresh. Of course, Linda guilt-tripped him like crazy, saying he had abandoned her. She also found a way to keep control by making him send her money from the part-time jobs he was working to support himself. And Jake, being the kind-hearted guy he is, gave in to her demands. Fast forward a few years, Linda married again and had a daughter, Amy. Since Jake knew firsthand how terrible of a mother she was, he always made sure to be there for his little sister. And honestly, it is amazing how close they still are despite everything. When Linda got remarried, she stopped demanding money from Jake because now she had a husband to foot the bill. And by the time Jake started working at my company, he met me. I am a year older than him, and technically his senior at work. From the first time I met him, I noticed he was ridiculously handsome, but I never crossed any professional lines. It took 8 months for Jake to finally confess that he had a huge crush on me. That is when we went on our first date. As soon as things got serious, we reported our relationship to HR, and thankfully, our company does not have strict policies about coworkers' datingas long as it is disclosed. Jake always tells me that meeting me changed his life for the better. I do not know how true that is, but I do know that after we got together, I started seeing just how much his mother controlled him. She constantly tried to guilt-trip him, playing the victim at every opportunity. Whenever they argued, she would hit him with, "You're just like your father," knowing full well how painful that was for him. I helped him set up boundaries, and since we have been together, I have seen such a change in him has finally started standing up for himself. Jake is the type of guy who loves bragging about his partner. Even though I sometimes get embarrassed, it is one of the things I love most about him. Every time he spoke to Linda, he would tell her how happy he was with me, how well I take care of him, and how his life has never been better. And that is when she started to hate me. She could not stand hearing how much Jake appreciated me. So she would try to flip it, making herself the victim, saying things like, "I sacrificed so much for you." But Jake, he was done with her games. He straight up told her, "No, Mom, I sacrificed my childhood taking care of you while you were out drinking and getting high." She hated hearing that. According to her, the past should stay in the past. She would scold him for even bringing it up. Then, the real chaos began. One night, when Jake and I were already living together, she showed up at our doorstep in the middle of the night, crying. She said she could not stay with her husband anymore. Why? Because she cheated on him with a random guy at a bar. And the best part? The guy found her husband on Facebook and messaged him, apologizing for sleeping with his wife, saying he had no idea she was married. Naturally, her husband lost it. But instead of apologizing, Linda told him it was his fault for not being man enough to fight for their relationship. Thank God, the man had some sense. He packed her bags and kicked her out. So now, here she was, at our doorstep, crying, begging Jake to take care of her. Jake told her this was her mess, and she needed to go make things right with her husband. But of course, she refused. She said she did not need him anymore because she had Jake to take care of her. I almost laughed. This woman has been using her son as her personal safety net forever, and she thought I was going to let it happen again? Absolutely not. I pulled Jake aside and told him, look, she can stay for a little bit, but she is not moving in with us. I refused to deal with her drama. Thankfully, he agreed. We let her stay for a weekend, let me tell you. It was the longest week of my life. She did nothing around the house, left dirty dishes everywhere, dropped her laundry on the floor expecting me to clean it up. She even had the nerve to demand I cook her favorite meals. And when I was too exhausted to cook, she would roll her eyes and tell me how her son deserved better than this. I kept my mouth shut because, you know what, I was trying to be mature. But when I found a cigarette butt on my kitchen floor, I snapped. Jake and I sat her down, and he told her she needed to find somewhere else to stay. And oh boy, that set her off. She screamed about how disrespectful he was, saying that as his mother, she had every right to stay as long as she wanted. That is when I stepped in. I looked her dead in the eye and said, "Number, you have no rights here. This is our home. We have been more than kind to you. And instead of being grateful, you have made things miserable. You need to leave." Her jaw dropped. Jake backed me up, telling her he was so lucky to have me and that I had taken better care of him in a week than she had his entire life. That was it for her. She started screaming at Jake, telling him he owed her for everything she did for him. But at that point, it was done. And just like that, she was out the door. The next morning, she packed her bags and left. We later found out that she had moved in with Amy, which honestly did not surprise me. That whole situation just made things between us even worse, but I never regretted standing my ground. And looking back, I think that is why she has always been so competitive with me, why she resents me so much. When Jake and I got married, she warned him, saying that he would regret marrying a woman like me. She told him he needed a real wife, someone homely who could take care of the house. The irony of that coming from her had me rolling. A homely wife? From a woman who barely raised her own children? Yeah, okay. She refused to come to our wedding in protest, but honestly, no one cared. It was one of the happiest days of our lives, and we did not miss her for a second. Now, fast forward to today, I am 3 months pregnant. Jake and I had not told anyone yet because I had suffered a miscarriage before, and it took a long time to get pregnant again. We wanted to be absolutely sure we were in the clear before sharing the news. But now, we finally felt ready. So, we planned a small get-together at our place to surprise everyone. Jake wanted to invite his mother, and even though I had my reservations, I agreed. Regardless of our relationship, I wanted our child to be surrounded by love from both sides of the family. As guests started arriving, people would take one look at my belly, freeze for a second, and then light up with excitement. Everyone was thrilled for us, asking about baby names and plans. And that is when the doorbell rang. Jake went to open it, and in walked Linda, but she was not alone. She was arm in arm with a man neither of us had ever seen before. I glanced at Jake, and he looked just as stunned as I was. She walked in like she owned the place, and proudly introduced him as her fiancé. Then, as if it were some casual side note, she announced that they were getting married in a few months. I stared at her, speechless. She had never mentioned this man before. She did not invite us to meet him. She did not give us a heads up about her engagement. But now, she was here, dropping this news in our home, in the middle of our celebration like it was the most natural thing in the world. Jake was not happy. I could tell by the way his jaw clenched. But we had already planned to make this day a positive one, so we politely congratulated her. As I reached out to shake her fiancé's hand, Linda suddenly stopped in her tracks. Her eyes landed on my belly. I watched the smile vanish from her face. She glanced between me and Jake, her expression shifting from confusion to pure irritation. "Are you pregnant?" she blurted out. I nodded, and immediately the room erupted into cheers. People started congratulating us again, calling it a day full of amazing news. I snuck a glance at Linda. Her face was turning bright red. She turned to Jake, her tone sharp. "And when were you going to tell me this?" Jake, always quick with his comebacks, just shrugged. "Well, Mom, you did not tell us about your fiancé, so I guess we are even." People around us chuckled, but Linda did not find it funny. She crossed her arms and snapped, "I am your mother. I should have been the first to know about my grandchild." I stepped in before Jake could respond. "We wanted to wait until we were completely sure everything was okay. After what happened last time, we were being extra careful." I reminded her about our last miscarriage and explained that today was about celebrating with everyone together. But apparently, that was not a good enough reason for her. She waved a hand dismissively and huffed. "Well, this is really inconvenient for me." I blinked. "Excuse me?" She sighed dramatically. "My wedding is in 6 months. That is exactly when you are due." Do you know how awkward it is going to be if people start calling me grandma at my own wedding? I just stared at her. Was she serious right now? I took a deep breath, trying not to roll my eyes. Linda, this is not a competition. You are getting married, and we are having a baby. That is something to celebrate, not stress over. But she just shook her head, muttering something under her breath about having to rush her wedding now because she did not want to be a grandmother yet. At this point, I was done. I turned back to my guests, pretending she did not exist. It was the only way to keep my sanity. Thankfully, Susan arrived shortly after, greeting us with a big smile and congratulating us. Jake pulled her aside and asked, "Did you know Mom was engaged?" Susan looked just as confused as us. "Engaged?" she repeated. "To who?" She glanced over at Linda's fiancé and then back at Jake, shaking her head. "Nope, never heard a word about him, but honestly, not shocked. You know how she changes men like the weather." We all laughed, but deep down I was still irritated. Then came lunch. I started to get up to help bring out the food, but Jake and my parents immediately stopped me. "You are not lifting a finger," my mom said firmly. "Sit down and let us handle everything." I smiled, appreciating their thoughtfulness. But then, out of nowhere, Linda spoke up. "Oh, let me bring her a plate. She should not have to do anything today." I froze. Linda, being helpful? Linda, bringing me food? My stomach turned with suspicion, but I kept my face neutral. Sure, thanks." A minute later, she placed a plate in front of me, making sure to announce to the whole table, "I picked extra vegetables for you, dear. Gotta keep my grandbaby healthy." Everyone cooed over how sweet she was being, but I was not fooled. This was not like her. I glanced down at the plate. It looked normal, but something about the way she was acting just felt off. Then I noticed something even stranger. Linda did not eat right away. She set her plate down, then went back to the kitchen to get a drink. I did not hesitate. While she was gone, I swapped our plates. I thought I had been sneaky about it, but when I looked up, I saw her fiancé watching me. Our eyes met. He said nothing. I just prayed he would keep his mouth shut. Before she could return, I started eating as quickly as possible to make sure she would not notice that I had swapped the plates. She finally sat down next to me and watched me closely. Then, in the most unnatural sweet tone, she asked, "Are you enjoying the food?" I nodded and smiled. "Yeah, it is good." Linda beamed. "You have to try the salad. I made sure to add extra for you since new moms should eat more greens." I nodded again and kept eating. Then, it happened. Linda took a bite of her food technically, the plate she had originally given me. She chewed once, then twice. Then her entire face twisted in disgust, and then she spat it out, loudly. The whole room went silent as she started coughing and gagging, looking at her plate in horror. I froze. This was her plate. My plate before I swapped them. Guests immediately rushed in, asking if she was okay. She grabbed her drink, took a desperate sip, but kept coughing. Then, without another word, she got up and ran to the bathroom. I turned to Jake and whispered, "We need to talk. Now." I pulled him aside and explained everything: how Linda had been acting suspicious, how she brought me my plate, how I had switched them just in case. Jake stared at me in shock. "Are you sure about this?" I nodded firmly. "I do not know what she put in that food, but whatever it was, she just ate it herself. If you do not believe me, ask her fiancé." He saw me switch the plates. Jake clenched his jaw. "I am handling this." I grabbed his arm. "Jake, wait. Maybe we should." But he was not waiting. He turned and stormed inside, making a beeline for Linda's fiancé. I watched as he pulled the man aside and started questioning him. I could not hear what they were saying, but I could see the anger in Jake's face. Then, Linda walked out of the bathroom, looking pale and angry. She tried to act normal, smoothing out her dress, but Jake was done playing games. "Did you put something in my wife's food?" The whole table went dead silent. Linda's head snapped toward Jake, her mouth opening and closing. "What?" she stammered. "Of course not. I would never do something like that." Jake took a step forward. "Then explain why you just spit out the food you gave to my wife." People started whispering around us, watching the scene unfold. Linda waved a hand, faking a laugh. "Oh, come on, it was nothing. The salad just tasted weird, that is all." Jake's voice was firm. "Weird how?" She sputtered. "Two just put extra seasoning, just for fun." My stomach dropped. "Seasoning?" I asked. She rolled her eyes. "It was just salt, a little prank." I stared at her in disbelief. You spiked my food as a prank? Linda scoffed. Oh, do not be dramatic. It is just salt, not like I poisoned you. Jake looked like he was going to lose his mind. Are you Ensign? Linda crossed her arms, completely unbothered. It is not a big deal. You are pregnant, you are going to be puking anyway. I thought it would be funny. Before I could respond, my mother marched straight up to her, her face red with anger. How dare you, she snapped. How dare you mess with my daughter's food while she is carrying your grandchild? Have you lost your mind? Linda rolled her eyes. Oh, for heaven's sake, it was a joke. Jake pointed at the door. Get out, she gasped. Jake, honey, do not be ridiculous. Get out. The entire room was silent. Linda looked around, expecting someone to defend her. No one did. Her fiancé just shook his head and stepped away from her. Even he was disgusted. Seeing that she was completely alone in this, Linda huffed and grabbed her purse. You people have no sense of humor, she muttered as she stormed out. Jake followed, making sure she actually left. And I just sat there shocked. My mother hugged me. Our guests gathered around, offering support. The entire mood of the celebration had shifted. What was supposed to be a joyful moment had been completely derailed by Linda's immaturity. A few minutes later, Jake returned, still fuming. But instead of focusing on his disaster of a mother, he turned to our guests and said, We are not letting this ruin today. I am going to be a father, and that is all that matters. The crowd cheered, rallying around us. But I knew the truth, this had changed everything. Jake and I talked that night, and we both agreed her child would never be around that woman. Linda had made her priorities crystal clear, and after what she had done, we could not trust her near our family. She had crossed the final line. And honestly, I do not regret cutting her off. Now, tell Mito you think we are wrong for keeping our baby away from her, because after today, I do not see another choice.